Medicine and the Machine podcast is brought to you by Medscape. Want the latest in medical news, expert perspectives, clinical tools, continuing medical education, and more? Stay on the pulse of medicine. Visit medscape.com.
Hello, this is Eric Topol. Welcome to our fourth episode of Medicine and the Machine. Today, we're continuing our discussion with Danielle Ofri and my co-host, Abraham Verghese. In the previous episode, we had an enthralling discussion with Danielle about the gift of time and whether AI could help improve the quality of time physicians spend with their patients. In this, the second segment of our discussion, we get into many other topics that are integral to the patient-doctor relationship, including medical errors, errors in the medical record, and administrative creep. Welcome again, Danielle and Abraham.
You know, I wanted to get back to the electronic record. I think for the three of us, one of our favorite subjects to perhaps rail upon or at least discuss how to make it better. But getting on the theme of errors, in charts today, 80% of the notes that we look at are cut and pasted from prior notes, which are error-laden. And the patients never have a chance to edit that. And I'm sure you've looked at your own notes as a patient and found mistakes, no less most patients. So how do we get that on track, and how much is that contributing to the problems that you delved into on errors, Danielle?
Oh, it's horrific. I was just seeing a patient today sees a rheumatologist, and the rheumatologist, and not to cast aspersion, they have a habit of keeping a running tally of the disease. So, and they copy and paste the last, 20 visits worth of what the x-ray showed and the treatment. So they have the running tally, but of course now that the note is 10 pages long. So of course we skip it all. I want to get to the last line. I just want to know what's happening now and where we are. And of course, who knows what's wrong. In fact, I had a patient recently who had a diagnosis of RA, rheumatoid arthritis, in the chart. And it dawned on me one day that, I've known him for a couple of years. I don't think I've ever seen any manifestations of RA. And I did what we inevitably call a diagnostic timeout. And I went back and hunted through the medical record. Of course, it took me an hour. But in fact, I don't think he ever had RA. He had a positive rheumatoid factor somewhere, 1,000 years ago. And then someone wrote down RA and it got, kept in the chart like a liturgy, and it never got out. And I think that happens a lot. These diagnoses accrue and we just faithfully copy them. So I'm sure there's quite a bit of medical error. And the problem is, who has time to go back and prune them all? And I know we hear patients should edit the charts, but can patients really, some patients probably have the intellectual wherewithal, but many patients, I think, would struggle with the terminology, and not know what to edit.
Right. Well, some of these things that we're talking about perhaps will lend themselves well to machine learning to be more accurate, from processing the data that's in the real record rather than some of the things that don't belong there or missing.
But who edits the machine? Who makes sure they're not making a mistake?
Right. Well, these are the challenges that lie ahead, and there's promise, but there's a lot of the proof points are certainly not there yet. It goes also back to the conversation. And I wonder what you think about that. But the conversation that you have with a patient, whether it's the actual time of the history or, as you alluded to, the second history while you're doing the physical exam, it's got a lot of valuable information in it. And now there are many companies, including the likes of Microsoft, Google, and some 25 startups that are taking that conversation and synthesizing a note which has all the critical components of it. And it's just starting to get a lot of acceptance in the UK and in China and in limited clinics that are piloting it in the US. Do you think that type of synthetic note from conversation with elimination of keyboard would have value?
I thought about that, and I wonder, is it going to transcribe our schmoozing? Can it filter out the as we approach depression by talking about what's going on with your family back home? Can it really do that? And I think it has potential. I need to see it in practice to really know if that could really, I mean, maybe during the actual nuts and bolts of the history, review of systems, all that stuff, I could see, but in actual conversation, does it know how to filter out the chit chat from,
from what I've seen, it learns, of course, by each doctor. So it would have to understand the Ofri schmooze stuff, that extracts that out. But
right.
After a limited number, whatever, 40, 50 of these notes per doctor, and then the patient also edit their side. So, it's interesting. It shifts the burden to machines and to patients to some degree, and machine learns for doctors. We'll see. This is a promise that lies ahead that is unfulfilled, but it has a chance.
But it seems like the doctor has to go back and then look at that, what the machine's done with the note, and then correct that to make it, clear before the patient sees it and might see things that could be construed as insulting or negative.
Well, the way it's worked so far is that there's only a limited number of notes that the doctor looks at to kind of understand their machine understands what they consider is what should go in the note, tries to find the pattern for that. Then it goes to the patient, and then it's signed off ultimately by the doc. But it's a work in progress. It's a theoretical thing.
And who's liable for mistakes?
Oh, mistakes? What mistake? What's that?
Right. So when the machine puts something in and then something goes wrong and the doctor gets sued, because you're right, the doctor will have signed off, but has the doctor have enough time to reread every word of every note that you sign? No, we have to sign off on them kind of in batch. But somewhere along the line, something will happen, and who's going to be up on the stand up there? The computer, the developer from Silicon Valley? I don't think so.
Well, there's a lot going on in this space. Recently, I'm sure you've seen, there's been a movement for more patients to record their whole visit. And that's part of this as well, is that the whole thing is archived. So you can, listen to the entire interview or conversation during a visit. So, this is a kind of in play, and it's not settled yet at all.
Right.
The corollary to that, for both of you, a question really is, we have the capacity so easily to record what actually happened in the room, with our state-of-the-art cameras, and to translate that into an accurate description of the physical exam. Right now, everybody does these perfect physical exams,
right.
Theoretically, and in practice, they probably don't. And I think that some way to make us more honest about what we're actually doing with the patient, and then record it legitimately. What do you know in that area, Eric, in terms of latest developments? And Danielle, your thoughts?
Well, it's an interesting point you're bringing up, kind of the body cam of the police officer for the physician. I don't know if we ever want to go there, but there is an issue that you've written about quite a bit, and that is, the cursory physical exam, or even less than cursory, where what I always refer to as the WNL, not for within normal limits, but we never looked. That's a real serious problem. And so, the point that I guess I always think about here is, we'll never be able to digitize a patient's life story, and nor should we try, I think. And that's different than having a conversation in a visit. And I don't know that we want to try to digitize the exam. I don't know, Danielle, what's your thought?
Well, I'll tell you, if I had 45 minutes for a visit, I could do it all for most patients. I could do a history, a reasonable physical, and write a cogent, coherent, concise note if I had 45 minutes. But I'm trying to fit that into 15 minutes, and that's not possible. So maybe rather than do all this jumbling machinations that cost gazillions of dollars, spend the money on letting us have adequate time for our patients, and I think we would do a better job.
I will say, though, Eric, to push back a little bit on the digitizing the history bit, we actually are working with a fellow whose title is a medical ontology fellow. So we have all this precision when it comes to diagnostic codes. You break your left foot in a mobile home while cleaning the toilet, there's a nice code for that. But the
Right.
best we can do about a patient is say, they're a 63-year-old male with a history of hypertension with no sense of where they are on the arc of their life and who they are. And I think, bringing an ontogeny with that kind of precision to the patient and the substrate of their life is a worthwhile endeavor. It's not to digitize them, but to better capture variation between patients.
Oh, I totally agree. And as Danielle pointed out back in that New England Journal essay, there's no CPT code for contemplation. But what I was getting at is the life story, which is somewhat, I see it as different, which is when the person is not just going through words, but the expression with plenty of nonverbal. What really worries them? What is really what's going on in their life that might not come up in a short visit, of course. But that to really understand and get in the head of a person and get in their, know their environment, their real story that is them. That I think is hard to get at. I would imagine, trying to come up with an ontogeny of coding, just like the challenges that we've seen, with CPT codes, which go through everything like you just described.
But what about just, a little extra time so I can have a free text that you call social history, and I can write the paragraph or two that captures, not every aspect of their life, but the ones that are, crucial for that, where their current pressures are, where they're from, how they got here, who they live with. It doesn't have to be a novel, and I don't need a code for it. I just need enough time to ask it and to write it. And in 45 minutes, I could probably do a reasonable.
Well, I think you could. You're a gifted writer.
Yeah, I think any good intern. Thank you, but any good internist who wants to ask about their patient can write a few lines about the crucial issues if we had the time. Right now, everyone's just struggling to keep up with the basics. No one has time to get into or document that.
Well, that is a really good point. And, that's why what we've been talking about in this podcast is trying to get the gift of time from various ways of tapping into the promise of AI. One other thing I wanted to get into with you is the administrator creep. As you've written, and I think is widely known, particularly among physicians. For the past 35 years, there was, over 3,200% increase in administrators and managers who don't see patients. And there's been relatively constant over the 35 years, maybe 40-50% increase. So a couple of orders of magnitude difference in non-patient care personnel.
Right. It used to be about a ratio of 1-to-1, and now it's about 10-to-1 of the non-clinicians per doctor.
Right. So what do you make of that? And what should be done about it?
Part of it, when I pointed that out in my paper, I got a few aggrieved letters from administrators who talk about how busy they are and how much work they have and how much they're helping patients. And I certainly recognize that many regulations have been put into place that require administrators just to attend to that. And I'm glad they're there, because I don't want to do that, and we need that. But I feel like the resources at some point are inadequately allocated, because I think the first thing we need is enough nurses and doctors on the floor in the clinic to take care of the patients. And as long as we're so short-staffed of that, we really have to divert the resources clinically. And at some point we have to prioritize. I don't want to call it quite rent-seeking behavior, but there seem to be a lot of people who, I don't know what they're making reports and things to do, but it is not moving the needle. I need someone to give vaccinations, not write a report. And so we've just got to the point of absurdity where there's just so many more administrators and clinicians, and we haven't fully staffed the clinical side yet.
Abraham, what about you?
Well, I marvel at the amount of administration it does actually take to keep abreast of all the various regulations and all the, the various payers. I think it's an onerous task for anybody. I can't profess to any understanding of what's happening up in that executive suite, but I know they're doing a lot of heavy lifting, whatever it is.
You can read the transcript from this podcast and find more Medicine and the Machine episodes at medscape.com/machine. Medscape news, features, clinical tools, and education are available for free. Stay on the pulse of medicine. Visit medscape.com.
The thing is, if you compare it, like in Canada, the ratio is about 3-1. So
Right.
somehow they managed to give quite good medical care, certainly reasonably comparable, with many fewer administrators. And I think a lot of it has to do with our patchwork of health insurance coverage in the US, where it's so you need administrators because there's 25 different insurance companies with different regulations and the like. But you can do it with fewer administrators.
Well, that's another question about the medicine and the machine is, can some of these folks be replaced by machines, or at least part of their efforts?
Right.
Abraham's described the heavy lifting. You have coders, you have all these back office operation people.
Right.
So much of that you would think could be picked up by machines, but I guess we'll have to see.
Yeah, and don't unemploy them. Retrain them as phlebotomists and nurse, CNAs. I think we need the people. We're just deploying it, and especially now that patient satisfaction is a big factor in reimbursement, it now matters to administrators. But the response is usually, oh, let's get valet parking or a nicer coffee machine or graham crackers in the waiting room. And to me, that's absurd. Ask the patient what they want. They want not to wait so long for their doctor and enough nurses on the floor, and the phone answered when they call. Do those things, and I think you'll have, give them 40 minutes with their doctor instead of 20. You'll have more satisfied patients. Forget the graham crackers.
I think one of the big challenges for anybody in an administration, and I really feel for them, is trying to predict the future. There's so much uncertainty out there, and they're dealing with huge budgets, and the slightest error in projection can just send you right into the red. So I think it's the instability of healthcare reimbursement in general, the very uncertain, sort of lobbying efforts that undo things that seem reasonable.
Right.
Very difficult task for anybody.
I get that, but some things are pretty constant. Illness, it's pretty constant. It never goes out of style. No matter what is in and out these days, everyone has got their chronic illnesses. We're still going to have diabetes and hypertension and obesity. That is not going away. And so I think we can at least predict that we still have a lot of chronically ill patients, and they need to see their doctors and nurses. And that much I think we know is a constant, and we should be able to work on that. And the idea of giving more time for a doctor, that's a financial decision. If you want to double the amount of time, you need to have twice as many doctors. And I think we could pull it off. I don't know how much it cost for a hospital to switch to the new system. Gajillions of dollars. We could have hired a lot of doctors and kept our other system, which was, was okay. But twice as many doctors would have had a real, huge impact, I think, on medical care.
Well, but then you're up against, for example, in psychiatry, a 15-minute medication visit is reimbursed at a higher level than a 40-minute psychotherapeutic encounter. So no one's doing any of those. Right.
But that's our society, and that's a decision we have to make as a society. What is of value? And I think, it's, and that's, I think, where our profession has really, we've weaseled out of this. We let the standards be set, a half century ago. And who was at the table? It wasn't, therapists, and it wasn't primary care doctors. It was mainly, specialists and procedure-oriented people. And that's why, procedures are reimbursed so much more. I mean, what is diabetes management? It is mainly education and talking with your patients about how to take your medications, how to eat. And if I talk with a patient about how to cook brown rice instead of white rice, which I do about 6 times a day, I'm probably reimbursed $40 on a good day. But if while I'm talking to my patient about how to cook the brown rice and broccoli, I simultaneously thread a tube into one of their orifices, and you can pick any orifice you want, but now that reimbursement goes up like 10-fold. And if while I'm threading an orifice through their, nostrils and talking about kale, and I run a CT scan over them, well, now you're talking big bucks, and that keeps the hospital afloat. But what do we need for diabetes management? We need a doctor to talk to a patient for 45 minutes, or a nutritionist about how to manage their disease. So, and our reimbursement scheme is really kind of flipped on its head.
Yeah, well, that goes to the corporatization, and also what contributed to those like relative value units. But the theme of a lot of what we've talked about today is about time. Could you ever foresee that you would have radio, TV, billboard ads for health systems? We give patients time.
I don't, I try not to watch TV at all. So,
Oh, okay. How about the other modalities of marketing? That is, will there be like the Geisinger thing we talked about with the 40 minutes locked up in a room, nobody can leave? Is that going to take off that where you said, Danielle,
I think
half as many doctors or twice as many doctors to see in twice as much time, or what?
I think if you gave patients and doctors a taste of that, and
Mhm.
administrators a taste of patient satisfaction with that, I bet it would. I mean, if you look back at this whole epidemic of quote burnout of doctors, I think we've mischaracterized it. Most doctors aren't burned out from medicine. Most of them love medicine and wouldn't want to trade it for anything else. And all they'd love to do more than anything in the world is have time with their patients to take care of them in the way they think is clinically appropriate. But they have so little time, and the burnout is really all the extrinsic stuff. I think most doctors would be thrilled to have twice as much time with their patients.
I agree with that diagnosis about what is the real cause of burnout. What do you think, Abraham?
Yeah, completely. I think people want to spend time with their patients, and one of the reasons we call this center that we run here at Stanford Presence is because that word kept coming up. It was the one word that patients said they wanted more of. They wanted their doctors to be present and not distracted by the medical record. And conversely, physicians were saying, we're doing everything but being present with the patient. The residents complained that they're off in a bunker looking at a screen, and that's not where they want to be. We put them there. That's our doing. It happened on our watch that they wound up spending so many hours there. So completely agree.
Well, my hope is that the whole medical community, led perhaps by doctors, but it could be broader than that, will stand up for time, of course, standing up for their patients, and they're getting the burnout rates, hopefully, to be markedly diminished, because otherwise we're going down a spiral here that's, there's the peak of everything of burnout and depression, suicide. I don't know what else can turn this around. Do you have any other remedies in mind, Danielle?
Well, I think it's also the patients, I think, taking a stand as well. I just got an email from a woman who wrote a piece for Stat News. She's a patient, and she's seeing the effect of her doctors who are so depleted and unable to handle their load. It's affecting her. And, she doesn't want her doctors to be drained down by the EMR. And I think when patients recognize that it's not working in their interest, they don't want their doctors depressed and suicidal. They want their doctors to be present, to be there as much as the doctors and nurses want to be. And so maybe we need to have an alliance with our patients that we all go on strike, right?
Well,
what if we didn't code for one day, all across the nation, and the patients simply refuse to, fill out their forms for one day? Well, maybe some people would pay attention.
Mm.
I actually see the traction that's come with burnout, has actually made an impact on the way administrators have reacted to the electronic medical record and not adding more keystrokes for us. I think it took burnout and attrition and, people getting recruited and then leaving for people to realize this is a very costly business. I don't think our suffering alone was enough, but, there are dollars involved when people leave medicine. So I think we finally have attention to this topic from the powers that be, but clearly it's not enough.
I'm not quite so sure. I mean, I feel like this whole emphasis on resilience, and well-being, and, so, take a mindfulness class or,
Exactly.
meditate during your commute. I don't want to take Pilates. I need an assistant.
I agree.
So, the idea that we need to be more resilient, it's the doctor's fault for not being resilient enough to handle all of this. And that's really not, I think the doctors are the most resilient people I know, that they survive and take pretty good care of their patients in the current, environment is quite resilient. So it's really actually an unfair reversal of that. So I think we need a little more, beyond.
Well, but there's resilience. I agreed, but there's so many people who are leaving the profession
Right.
prematurely, and they're telling their kids, whatever you do, don't go into medicine, and these are not good signs we'd love to see turned around. Well, I want to say, I'm going to turn over to Abraham to wrap things up on this medicine and machine, but what a privilege to have you aboard with us, Danielle. Really fantastic. So Abraham, why don't you close it out?
I would indeed. So Danielle, you've been such a wonderful and important voice in medicine. I think that one of the burning needs in medicine, in science in general, I think, is that of a commentator, someone on the inside who does take the time to reflect, does take the time to ask the difficult questions, does voice the angst of the profession. And you've done that so beautifully for many years now. And we hope that there's much more coming. And thank you so much for being on this podcast with
That was my pleasure. And to also give a shout out to your writing, Abraham, and yours, Eric, that really, I think, bring new ideas to life through fiction and nonfiction. Because as you always say, fiction is the great lie that tells the truth.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.